What is going on, everybody? Julio here, and in today's video I'm bringing you yet another responsive website tutorial. So the theme for this project is going to be a travel website called Seaside, and if you notice there, I also added in some animations, and I achieved this by using the scroll reveal JavaScript library, which is basically going to allow you to add animations on scroll once the element comes into view, just like so. There's a lot more to learn here as well in regards to CSS Grid. You're going to learn how you can create this sort of layout where you position the items exactly where you want them to be and make them overlap. As far as JavaScript, there's also a lot of things you can learn here. For example, with the interaction with the links, if I want to change the active class from home to, let's say, plan trip, if we click the link here, as you can see there, the active class that we have right here with this little marker also changes. So you're going to learn how to create that. And something else you're going to learn how to create if we go to the responsive view and we open the navigation. So normally, unless you have an actual page, for example, here plan trip.html, then this is not going to close automatically. Since this is a one-page layout, it's just going to stay there. But with a little bit of JavaScript, we're also going to make this close once we click on the links. And as you can see, the active class here changes as well. So since we're already here, as I mentioned, this is fully responsive. So it's going to look pretty good on mobile devices. If we make this bigger, you'll see that the layout changes a little bit here as well. Same with the footer. And for the next breakpoint, this is where things are going to change, just like so. And then for the next one as well, which is going to be for the larger screens. And then everything is just going to become a one column layout. So if you find this video useful, make sure you thumbs it up. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe, hit the bell icon to turn notifications so that you never miss one of my videos, and feel free to check out my social media accounts. All the links are going to be in the description below. Now, let's jump right into the tutorial. So as usual, for those of you that want to follow along with me, I'll be placing a link in the description below to a GitHub repo where you can get all the assets that you see right here. So feel free to pause the video and then come back once you have those files. A quick overview though, so right here inside of the head, I'm importing the scroll reveal CDN, which is what we will be using for the on-scroll animations. Then also the remix icons, and obviously this is the style sheet that we will be using for our styles. Then I just have some comments here for the content as well as the script. So we are going to start with the header, and let me actually close this. And now inside of the header, we will start like usual with the header tag. We will apply the class of header as well as the ID of header. And the IDs here are mostly just going to be used for JavaScript manipulation. Then in here, what I want to do is have the nav tag. And I'm going to apply the class of nav here as well as the class of container, and then followed by the ID of nav. So once we have that in here, what I want to do is set up the logo. So I'm going to be using, let me actually just get rid of that white space. So I'm going to be using an anchor tag here, and I'm going to be applying the class of logo. It can point back to the index.html. And as far as the content here, we can set it to Seaside, which is the name of the company. Then underneath, I'm going to have a div, and this div is going to have the class of nav mobile. And this is just going to be the overall wrapper for the mobile navigation. It's also going to allow us to basically set up the navigation for mobile devices without having to do a lot of resetting later on when we want to make this particular navigation responsive. So in here, I want to continue with the UL, the class of, actually, I'm going to call this list. And in there, I'm going to have an li with the class of list item. Then an anchor tag, and this one is going to have the class of list link. I'm also going to be applying another class here of current. So that's going to be the little marker that we had before for the current selected link. And now that we have the basic structure here of the navigation items, what I'll do is just copy this a few more times. And now we can just populate the text. So this one is going to be destinations. Then the next one, plan trip. And then here we will say book now. And we actually don't need any more, so we can go ahead and get rid of this one. And I also want to apply another class here. And this one is going to be LG screen hidden. And this is just a class that I will use later on to hide this particular element on larger screens later on. So once we get that out of the way, the next thing that I want to do is go underneath of this div for the nav mobile. And in here, I'm going to have an anchor tag, and this anchor tag is going to have the class of BTN. And then it will also have a class of SM screen hidden, because this particular element I don't want to show on the smaller screens. For now, we can just use a placeholder here, and I guess we can do the same thing for the other ones. Kind of just forgot about it. And I could have done all that with just one click by using Emmet. And to do that, you can just hold down the Alt key, and then you can just click, for example, where you want, and then basically you can type in everywhere that you made that selection at the same time. But like I said, I kind of just forgot about it. So continuing here, what I want the text here is going to be book now, because this is going to be the big green button that we have, which I don't want to show in the mobile view, which is why we have this particular link here as opposed to the big green button. Then underneath here, I'm going to have a div with the class of menu toggle icon. I will have another class of LG screen hidden again, because like I said, I don't want to show the mobile icons here when we move to the larger screens. And then I'm also going to have a class of place items center. And for this, we will be using Flexbox basically to align the icon that we will have inside of this container. Finally, we will have the ID of menu toggle icon, just like so. So in here, what I want to do is have the icons themselves. And to get the right icon here, we will be using Remix Icons, as I mentioned. And the class for this particular icon is going to be RI, menu, and then 3 line. I'm also going to apply a secondary class here just for selection purposes of menu open icon. Just like so. Then I'll go ahead and just copy this down below. I'm going to change open to close. And then I'm going to also change this because we want the X icon. So close fill, just like so. And that's basically everything that we need for the header. Now we are going to go ahead and move to the CSS. So we are going to be starting here by importing the font from Google Font. So I already grabbed it, but don't worry about it. I'm going to actually include this particular portion of the code, as well as the custom properties inside of the starter files, just so that you guys don't have to sit through this and have to type everything out. So as far as the custom properties, obviously we want to declare this within the root for scoping, just so that we are able to use these variables everywhere within the CSS file. So here I'm going to define a light color, and this one is going to be white. Then I'm also going to actually just gonna copy this, since I'm going to have 3 colors. For the time being, I'm going to make this one 504 F4F. And then I can just go ahead and change this to dark color. Then this one is going to be the accent. And the hex for this one is going to be 00CC90, which is going to be the green. Now I'm also going to set some font sizes. So font size extra small. And this one is going to be 1.2 rem. Rem because they just scale better. So when it comes to responsive design, it's a good practice to use rems and ems, but I just prefer using rems in general. Now I'm going to copy this a few more times. This one is going to be 1.6. Then this one is going to be 2.4. And then finally here we will have 3.6. Now we just have to change the naming here. So this one is going to be SM. The third one is going to be medium. And then the last one is going to be LG for large. What we want to do now is grab the font that we imported here. So we will actually put that in a variable, because the benefit of the custom properties is that once you use those variables, if you want to make changes, all you have to do is just literally come to the root here and make the changes here. And every instance of that variable will basically just change, as opposed to you having to go in manually and change it one by one. So like I said here, we will continue by setting up the font family. And this one is going to be Poppins. And we will have a fallback of sans serif. Then we will also have some custom properties for the font weight. And I believe this one was light, because I will have 3 of them. So at 300, and then I can just copy this down below, change this to 4, which is normal, and then bold is going to be 700. So normal, and then bold. And we actually have a spelling mistake here. So it should be light, like that. Now I'm going to also set some for spacing, and here I will use margin SM, and this one is going to be 1 rem. And now I'm going to copy this down below. The second one will be 2, and the third one is going to be 3. Now we can just go ahead and change the names. And I'm also going to have one for the section spacing, which is going to be 8 rem. Now finally, we are going to set up some other variables here, or custom properties, for the gap. So SM 1.5 rem, and then we will do the same, copy this down below, and just change the values. So this one will be MD, and this one LG. And then the value here is going to be 4 rem. And that's pretty much it for the custom properties. Now we are going to move down to the base styles. So we are going to start with a basic reset. So we will use the universal selector. We are also going to select the before and after pseudo elements, because obviously they're not part of the document unless you actually create them. So that's why we also have to apply the reset to them as well. And this one should actually be the after. So what I want to do here is just reset the margin, the padding, and then set the box sizing to border box, which is going to make the math when sizing your elements a lot simpler. Then the HTML document, and the font size here is going to be 62.5%. And this basically just means 10 pixels. So let me make a comment here. And the reason for this is because when we work with rem units, obviously it's going to be relative here to this value. So it makes the math a lot simpler. For example, here, since this is 10 pixels, then if we wanted 15 pixels, we can just do 1.5, as opposed to if it was 16 pixels, then not necessarily more complex math, unless you're using like larger numbers. But this just makes things a lot easier. And doing it in percentages as well is going to help out when scaling using the zoom. The next thing I want to do here is, well, we are going to have some reusable classes here as well, but we're not going to get to that till later on. So we are going to continue with the body. And here I'm going to set the font family, which is going to be the variable font family. Then here I'm going to set the font size, which is going to be font size SM right here. And next I'm going to set the color, and the color here is going to be the dark color. And then finally I'm going to set the overflow here on the X to hidden. And the reason why I'm doing that is because later on when we add the on-scroll animations, we are going to get some overflowing as the items are actually moved out of the screen so that they can move back in. So doing that is going to get rid of these scroll bars. Next, I'm going to select all the anchor tags. I'm going to set the color here to be the same dark color variable. And I'm going to get rid of the text decoration by setting it to none. Next, I'm going to select all of the ULs, and then the list style here is going to be set to none. I'm going to select my images, and then I'm going to give them a max width of 100%. And this is just going to make sure that they don't overflow their parent. I'm also going to give this a display of block. And then finally, I'm going to select all of my icons, and I'm going to give it a font size of, which is going to be the medium font size. And that's pretty much it for the base styles. Now we are going to move down to the reusable classes. First thing here I want to target is the container. And this container is going to have the max width of 116 rem, which is going to be 1160 pixels basically. Then the margin is going to be 0 and auto. So that's going to center the container in the middle of the page. And then finally, I want to add some padding on the sides. So 0 top and bottom, and 1.5 rem to the left and the right. Now we are going to work on the header itself. So what we want to do here is we are also going to have more reusable classes later, but for now we are just going to continue with the header itself and then just add more classes here on this section as we need later on. So as far as the header here, I'm going to select it. I'm going to apply a background color, which is going to be the light color. Then I will give this a position of fixed. The starting top position here is going to be 0. Same thing with the left. Then I'm going to give this a width of 100%. The reason being is because once you give this a position of, let's say, fixed or absolute, it's only going to take as much space as it needs. So given this, the width of 100% is just going to make sure that it stretches all the way across. Then finally, I want to give this a C index of a high value just to make sure that it stays on top of all the other content within the site. Now I will select the nav itself, and the nav is going to have a height of 8 rem, and should be 8 rem here. Then it will have a display of flex. I want to align my items to the center in this container. And then I want to justify the content space between, just that they are all separated equally with space in between them. One more thing that I want to do here is set the background color to be inherited from the parent, which is this header. So basically it's going to get this white color. Next thing that I want to do here is set some styles to the logo. We are going to start with the font size, which is going to be the medium one. Then the font weight. And this one is going to be the bold one. And finally, as far as the color, we will use the accent. Just like so. Then we are going to work on the menu toggle icon. And in here, I'm going to give this a width of 3.5 rem. I'm going to do the same thing here with the height. And something else that I want to do here is set the background color to the accent. Then what I want to do is set the cursor to be pointer, just so that when we hover over this item, it's clickable. Or at least we get the effect that it's clickable. And something that I want to do here is also give this a transition later on for some animations. So the transition here is going to be on the color over 0.25 seconds. Now, I only want to show one icon at a time, so I'm going to select this close menu icon and just hide it. And to do that, I'm going to select the menu close icon and say that the display will be of none. Just like so. So remember that I also gave this a class of place item center. Well, the purpose here, let me see if I can find it right over here. The purpose here was just to center this with Flexbox. So this is going to be one of the reusable classes. So let's go back up here. And what I want to do is give this a display of flex. And then I want to align items. Where's the align items? Align items to the center. And also justify the content to the center as well. So now we get the icon perfectly aligned here in the middle. So the next thing that I will do here is, let me see. So I actually have to set a color here as well. Obviously, because right here, the contrast, I mean, it looks good, but it would look a lot better if it was white. So let's go back here and set the color to be light. Just like so. Now underneath here, we are going to select the list. And this list is going to have a display of flex. And then we are going to change the flex direction back to a column. And then I want to apply a gap here for the spacing, which is going to be the gap SM. Just like so. Remember that I also said that I didn't want to show this right here within the smaller screens. So that's going to be this class right here. So SM screen hidden. Let me actually put it all the way here as well. And here I'll just do a display of none. So now we can continue here with the list. I'm going to style the list link here a little bit. So I'm going to give this the position of relative because this is where we are going to be using the pseudo elements and they need a position absolute, and it's going to be absolute relative to this list link. So here, the next step is going to be selecting the list link once more. Then we will select the after. And then here we want to select the current link as well. List link current, actually, after. Just like so. And we want to set the content to an empty string. Then the position is going to be of absolute. Then the starting top position is going to be 50%. The right is going to be -1 rem. Then we want to transform translate y, -50%. And then here we want to set a width and height as well. So the width here is going to be 0.5 rem. The height will also be 0.5 rem. Then we will set the background color to be the accent. And we also want to set a border radius here to make it round of 50%. And now I want to basically hide this and only show it on hover. So to do that, I'm going to set the opacity here to 0. Then I'm going to transition the opacity. And it's going to be over 0.25 seconds. And I misspelled it here, missing an O. And now we can go ahead and basically set up the hover animation, which is going to be pretty simple. So for example, now we can go ahead and say list link and then followed by current and then after. And what I want to do here is set the opacity to 1, and I'm going to basically say that it will be important. Why is it not showing up? Of course, I was like missing the exclamation sign the whole time. But anyways, this is just going to make sure that it's always showing up here with the first one. So list link current, the opacity here is going to be 1. And it seems like I messed up somewhere because this shouldn't have, oh, I know why. It's because I duplicated everything here. So all of them have the class of current. So let me just actually get rid of this. And again, here we can just use Emmet for this and just do it in one go. But yeah, that's looking much better now. So let's go back to the CSS and then we can make the rest of them work on hover. So we can just copy this, paste it down below. We can get rid of the current class. And then here we can just set the opacity to 1 on hover. And of course, we actually have to specify that this is a hover effect. So here we will add hover in between. And now if we go ahead and hover over the items, you see that we get the hover animation. Something else that I want to do next is going to be basically fixing up this mobile navigation that we have here in the middle, because right now it doesn't look very good. So we are going to target the nav mobile. And here I want to set a background color of F8, 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 which is going to be a really light gray color. Then I'm going to set the position to be of absolute. Starting top position will be 0. Then the left is going to be 0 as well. The width 100%. And then I'm going to give this some padding all around, which is going to be the same spacing that the container has of 1.5 rem. Now, as far as the C index, I'm going to set this to -1, and that's just so that it falls behind its parent, as you can see right here. So it's not like literally on top of it. And let me actually inspect this because there's an issue right here. And the issue right here is with the nav, which I was pretty sure. Oh, so here's the issue. It has align self as opposed to align items. So that's why it's not showing up the correct way. So let's go back up to the nav and take care of that mistake. Right here, align self, it should be align items. And now it's going to be perfectly aligned in the middle here. We also have to push this down just so that it's right underneath of where this nav ends. As you can see, it has a height of 80 pixels. So let's go all the way back down. And the way that we are going to be taking care of that is by, well, first of all, we have to hide it. But for example, right here, I could say something like transform, translate, and then the Y. And I could say 8 rem, which is the same height that this has, and now it looks perfect. But since we initially want to hide this, what we want to do is say that I want to push this up by negative 100%. And let me actually move this up right here. Or actually, let me just put it down here. Then as far as the transition, I'm going to select the transform. And this one is going to be over 0.25 seconds as well. Then what I want to do is mess with the JavaScript styles that are going to basically make this navigation functional. So what I want to do here is say that the nav, when it has a class of active, I want to select the nav mobile. And then I want to transform, translate the Y to 8 rem. So for example, if we came here to the nav, this one right here, and we added an additional class of active, you'll see that this is now going to show up, which is exactly what we will do on click using JavaScript. So let's go here inside of the main.js. And the first thing that we are going to do is define some global variables. So we will start with the const, which is going to be the menu toggle icon. In this one, we can get document get element by ID. And then we can just pass in the ID in here, which is going to be menu toggle icon. Then we are going to need the nav itself. And then we can just go ahead and call this one nav mobile. And for now, I can just comment this one out. We are going to need several more variables later on. So let me actually copy this once more. And then we can just go ahead and replace this later. But for the time being, we're just going to work with this. And I apologize if my voice sounds weird at times. My nose is a little bit stuffy. But like I mentioned, we are now going to continue with the making the mobile navigation work. So we are going to start here by defining a function. So this one here, we can say toggle, or call, we should say, toggle menu. And in here, we can just say that we want to select the nav mobile and we want to toggle a class. So class list toggle. Toggle means basically that when you click the item, it's going to add and remove that class over and over. So the class that we want to add here obviously is active. And what we want to do next is come down here. We are going to revisit this later, obviously, because we are going to be adding more stuff. But as far as the core functionality of making this work, this is all we need for now. plus the obviously attaching the event listener to the menu toggle icon, which is what we are going to be doing now. We will add an event listener. This event listener is going to be a click event. And now we can just call the function here, just like so. So now when we go ahead and click here, it should work. And it does, which is exactly what we want. So as I mentioned, we are also going to be adding some sort of overlay here. So let's go ahead and do that. So back within the CSS, we are now going to select. Oh, something else that I want to do here as well is change the icon, but that's really easy. Since we already have this active class here on click, we can just basically manipulate the element based on that class being on or off. So to do that, we are going to say that when the nav has the class of active, we want to target the menu icon open within. So menu, close icon. So in this situation, we can just go ahead and just edit it out and say that open will have a display of none, and it's going to hide it. And then I can just copy this down below. Let me actually select the whole thing. And this one is going to be for close. So close will now have a display of block. So if we try this again, you see that the icons are going to be changed, which is exactly what we want. So again, as far as the overlay here, we are going to using again pseudo elements. This time I'm going to be applying it to the header. So header, before, then we set the content here. Position is going to be absolute. Starting top position 0. Starting left position is going to be 0. Width 100%. And the height 100 of the BH. As far as the background color, here we are going to be using an RGBA. To get the black color, we need 0, 0, 0. And then for the alpha or transparency, we will use 0.8. Something else that I want to do here is set a C index of -1, just so that I can push it behind my header content, just like so. Now I'm going to hide this by using the opacity and setting it to 0. I also want to scale this all the way down because, for example, here, as you can see, if I hover over this, this is the before pseudo element, meaning that it's still on top of all my content that I have there. We just can't see it, which is why we are going to scale it all the way down to 0. And to do so, we can use transform, scale, and set this to 0. I want to set a transition here for my opacity. Again, over 0.25 seconds. Actually, I'm going to make this a little slower at 0.5. Then underneath, this is where the JavaScript manipulation comes in. So when the header has the class of active, I want to change the styles of the before pseudo element. And here I basically want to turn on the opacity as well as the scale, set it back to 1. And now we are going to revisit the JavaScript file. So you can see nothing really happens because we haven't worked on it yet. But here we can just uncomment one of these. And I'm going to call this one header element. And then we can just go ahead and change the element that we are going to be selecting to the header. And then we want to go inside of this toggle menu. And here we want to duplicate this. And then we are going to grab this header element. And then again, we just want to toggle the class of active. So now if I go ahead and click it, you see that the overlay for the rest of the content behind this header and the navigation shows up and disappears as we click the button on and off. And something else that I wanted to do is add a scroll effect here. And I'm just going to be adding a border. So let me just go ahead and add a little placeholder here underneath of the header. So placeholder. And now we can go ahead and go underneath of this. It doesn't really matter because this is only like for demo purposes. I'm going to be deleting it shortly. So again, what I will do here is select the placeholder. And I'm going to give this a height of, let's say, 1,000 pixels. So let's just do something really large, like 5,000. Now we get some scroll bars, which is what we want, obviously. So going back inside of the CSS, well, we technically are inside of the CSS. What we want to do here is basically select the header again, and then say that when the header has the active scroll class, again, we will be applying this through JavaScript. We want to add a border bottom of, let's do 1 pixel, solid, and then we can do an RGBA. In this case, we are going to do something really light here at 0.1 for the transparency. So to add this through JavaScript, we are going to go and basically uncomment this out as well. And we are going to be selecting the, well, actually, let's comment that back out because we already have the header element here. We will be using this one later on. But anyways, going back to this, we are going to go underneath of this comment. And what I want to do here is basically set a scroll event on the window object. And here I'm going to have a function as expression. And this is going to be a constant, obviously. Header scroll event. And then this is going to be an arrow function. Let me just actually clean that up a little bit. So what I want to do in here is have an if statement. And what I want to do here is say that, for example, we are going to say this. And this is just going to be referring to the window object. And then I'll say that if the scroll Y position is greater or equal to 30, then I want to toggle the class on the header element. Well, not necessarily toggle, but add the class to the header element of active scroll. Else, I want to remove this class. So I'm going to copy this in here and just change add to remove. And now if we go ahead and try this out, oh, it doesn't work. And the reason why is because we haven't called this function. So let's actually apply the event listener to the window object. Add event listener, which is going to be scroll. And then in here, we can just pass in the header scroll event. And now it should work. Just like so. As you can see, it's really subtle, but you can see the border bottom here, which is exactly what we want. So now we can go ahead and go back to the CSS file. Then we can get rid of this. And then we can get rid of this as well because we don't really need it. So we are going to stay in here inside of the HTML file because we are going to start working on the main section and all the sections within it. So let's continue by opening up the main tag. And we're actually going to grab this. And then what we will do is come down here to the end main and then paste this in. So now we can go ahead and start working on the other sections. So underneath of the showcase comment, we will say that we want a section with the class of showcase. we also want to add the additional class of section as well as an ID of showcase. And here we will have a div with the class of showcase container and the class of container followed by an additional class of dgrid. The dgrid class is basically just going to say that it's going to turn everything I apply to a grid container. Then in here, I'm going to have a wrapper from my data. So I will call it showcase data, and then an additional class of order 2, which I will be using flexbox on to kind of order things later on based on breakpoints. So in here, I'm going to have my tagline, my title, my description, and my button. So I will say that I'll use a span with the class of tagline. Here we can just say begin the journey. Then for the title, I will use an H1 because it's kind of like the main title in this website. I'll give it the class of title and then the class of main title. So in here, what I want to do is say that heal your soul at the, and then I will have a span. This span is going to have the class of accent text. And this is the class that is going to basically separate colors from the rest of the text. So this one is going to be the green color. And then I'll say here, beach. Just like so. Then I'm going to have a p tag with the class of description. And here we can just use some dummy text. So lorem, that's actually too long. Let me actually cut this up a little bit. And then I'll continue underneath by having an anchor tag with the class of btn. And then as far as the text, it will say explore. So that's pretty much it for this wrapper. Next, I'm going to have another wrapper div for my images, which I'm going to call image group. And I want an additional class here of order 1, as well as the grid. Then in here, I'm going to have an outer div for all of my images, just so that when I apply the hover effect, the images are not growing too large. So it's kind of, the effect is going to stay contained. So each div is going to have the class of image box, and then an additional class to manipulate them individually. So this one is going to be image left. Then the image itself is going to be inside of the images folder, and then showcase image 1. We are going to speed up the process by copying this. And now we can change the class here in the middle to center, and this one to right. Then we have to do the same thing for the images 2 and 3. And right now, the other content is underneath of the header because the header is floating now since it has the class of fixed. So we are going to have to use some margin top to kind of compensate for this. So let's jump back inside the CSS file. And then here underneath of the showcase comment, we are going to compensate by selecting the showcase section and giving it a margin top, which is going to be the same height as the navigation of 8 rem. Then we are going to scroll back to the here reusable classes, and we will say that the grid class is going to have a display of grid, and then the section class will have a padding block. And the padding block, it just basically refers to the space on the top of the and the bottom. So same thing with the margin block. And here what I want to use is apply the section spacing custom property that we created. And now you see that we get the spacing here on the top as well as on the bottom. So let's go back all the way down to the showcase comment. And here I'm going to select the showcase container. And I'm going to apply a gap just to create some separation. We will say we want a gap, and it's going to be gap LG, gap SM. Why is it only picking up the gap SM though? And even then, it's not applying it. Showcase container. Oh, there's always an issue. It's like whenever you don't pay attention, there's always an issue. So there we go. Now the gap should be working, just like so. Then we can continue now to working on the images. So we are going to select the image group. And what we want to do here is say that grid template columns, we are going to start with 2 rem. And then we want to repeat this 2 times. And then it's going to be 1 fraction. I want the same gap here again of 2 rem. And then I can just go ahead basically and copy this and paste it here. So let me better show you guys what's going on. So let me open up the inspector, and then now I can display this grid. So you have to play around with things to kind of just figure out what kind of layout you want and the spacing. Since I'm going to be positioning the items exactly where I want them to go, I wanted to have a specific spacing between them, which is why where this 2rem comes into play, which is something that you're going to see into play right now. So underneath of here, I'm going to select my image box. And I'm going to give them a min height of 35 rem. Then I'm going to give them a box shadow of 2 pixels, 2 pixels, and then 1 rem RGBA. And here we can do something really subtle like 0.1. Then the overflow is going to be of hidden. And as I explained, this has to do with the hover effect. So I'm actually going to comment this out for now, and then later on, once we get to that part, I'm going to show you what I mean. So now I can say that the showcase image box actually should be separated. So showcase image box. So here, what I want to do is set a min height of 25 rem instead. So the reason being is because obviously I'm going to have repeat the same image box later on. So I want this one to be specifically the ones in the showcase. So with that out of the way, now I'm going to select all of my images inside of my image box. And I'm going to give them a height of 100%. Then I want to object fit here of cover. Just like so. And then for the hover effect itself, I want to transform. And well, it's going to be on the transform. First, we have to say that it's a transition, transform, and then here we can say over 0.5 seconds. Now then we say that when the image box is hovered, we want to target the image inside of it, and we want to transform scale. And we'll do something really small like 1.1. So now when we hover over the image, you see that they grow. But I don't want them to grow like that. So this is why I had the overflow here in place. So now, when I hover over them, they still grow, but the image itself, it's not overflowing its parent, it's being contained, which is exactly what we want. So here comes the fun part, which is basically aligning and positioning the images exactly where we want them to be. So for this, let's see the grid once more. So the first one I want to position is going to be the first image with the class of left. So I wanted to start at the grid column 1 and span all the way here to 4. So to do that, we are going to select the image left, and then I'm going to say that the grid column here is going to be starting at 1 and then ending at 4, just like so. Now, as far as the grid row, I want to basically let grid decide for me and then just keep adding as many as needed. So I'm going to say that the grid row is going to start at 1, and then it's just going to span 10. And now if we look at the grid again, you're going to be able to see, well, for the time being, you're not going to be able to see anything, but I have to basically lay out the others as well. But let's just keep going. So here I have to set a C index because I want this one to be on top of the rest of them. So I'll just do 5. Then for the image center, what I want to do here is started at 3, and then, for example, over here, and then go all the way across to 6. So let me just copy this, paste it here, and say that I wanted to start at 3 and stretch all the way across to 6. So now if I do this and show the grid again, now you're going to be able to see how this one in here in the grid row portion is spanning 10, which is exactly what we want. So here we have to do the same thing for this one. And I'm just going to paste it here. And then as opposed to obviously starting from the first one, we want to start from the 7th, which is going to be this one right here, and then it's going to stretch all the way. It's basically going to span 10 more. Then we will do the same thing for the last one, which is going to be the image right. And this one is going to start at 5. So it's going to start here and stretch all the way across. So we can say start at 5, and then we can just do -1. And it's stretching all the way across where we want it to go. As far as the grid row, here we can say start at 3, and then just span 10 as well. And that's going to basically be our basic layout for this image group. And as you can see, everything looks pretty good. Then as far as the C index, I also want to make sure that it basically stays on top. So I'll do a C index of 5. So now that that's out of the way, you see that everything's working, including the hover effect. I'm going to make this smaller again. And now we can go ahead and style the text a little bit. So we will continue with the tagline. And it's going to have a display of inline block. Then I'm going to apply a font size of extra small. Followed by the font weight of bold. Then I will text transform to uppercase. Then the color here is going to be accent. And finally, I want to apply a margin bottom of the margin SM. So that's the reason why I gave this a display of inline block, because if we just have the default of inline, it's not really going to respect the margin bottom or top that we have here. Well, if you wanted to apply one. So let me just comment that out so that you guys see what I mean. See? So that's why we do a display of inline block. Then next, I'm going to style the BTN. In here, it's going to be the same deal. So display of inline block. Then the background color is going to be accent. Then the color of the text is going to be the light color. Then finally here, I want to add a padding top and bottom of 1 rem and 2.5 left and right. Then I also want to apply a hover effect. So the hover effect here is going to be on the background color. So the transition is going to be on the background color over 0.25 seconds. So BTN, hover, then the background color here. I want to change it to a slightly darker shade of this, which is going to be 00, BE, and then 85. Should be 85. Then the color itself, actually, let me just double check here. So, well, we don't really need to do anything with the color itself since it's already having a good contrast here. However, the spacing that we have right here, we're also seeing this button. That is something that we have to hide. So let's go back to the reusable classes. So remember that we have the SM screen hidden. This is going to be a display of none. So if we go back here, this is going to be this button that we have. So since it's basically overriding this that we have here, since we gave it a display of block, what we can do instead is just give this the class of important. Well, not the class of important, just say that it's important. And then later on larger screens, when we want to see this button, we can just override that. So going back here, as I mentioned, we also want to control the spacing between this, but we will actually just do that on the text itself. So in fact, since we want to continue with the structure that we already have, as far as the tagline, title, and then the description, I'm going to put this further down the bottom, and I didn't mean to open that link. So we are going to continue with the title. The title is going to have a font size of the variable MD, and it's going to have a margin bottom of margin MD. Then as far as the main title itself, we are going to apply some additional styles just to this, which is going to be a larger font size. So the font size is going to be LG. Now we can go ahead and style the accent text. And this is just going to be the variable of the accent color. And then finally, we have the description. And the description will have a margin bottom. And it's going to be the margin LG, just like so. So now everything is starting to look pretty good. Next, we are going to be working on the next section, which is going to be the popular destinations. So let's go ahead and take care of that right now. And for that, we will find the comment here for the start of the popular destinations. And it's going to be the same deal here. So we are going to have a section. This section is going to have the class of popular destinations. Then I'm going to have an additional class of section as well as an ID of popular destinations. Just like so. So now that we have that inside of here, I'm going to also have a popular destinations div, which is going to be for the container as well as the class of container. And we also need the grid class here as well. Then inside of here, I'm going to have obviously the same data that we had before, but this is going to be slightly different. So I'm going to call it popular destinations, and should I just copy this because I already have it in my clipboard, and then say data, just like so. Now, what we can do, since the rest of it is going to be exactly the same, we can actually come in here and just grab this portion and paste it in here. And the only thing that we have to change is just get rid of this main title. Then the rest is going to be exactly the same. So as far as the text, this one is going to be popular destinations, obviously. Then for the title, what we want to do here is change this to an H2, because obviously the level 1 heading is going to be the most important one in your website. So you only want to have one. And this one is going to be the heading for this particular section. And as you can see, since we are reusing components, basically everything already looks pretty good with us without us having to do much here. And that's going to be it for that one. Now let's go ahead and work on the other wrapper. So underneath of here, let me actually create some additional separation here as well, just so that it's more readable. So down here, we are going to have a div with the class of beach data wrapper, and also the class of image box. And this particular first class is just so that we can manipulate this element without having to override any of the styles that this particular class already has. So in here, I'm going to have another div, and this one is going to have the class of beach data. And it should be just data, not wrapper. And I forgot to apply the class here. It should be a dot. And I can't type. So there we go. Then I want another div, which is going to be the wrapper for the particular information that I will have. And this div is going to have the class of beach data and then inner. And I'm also going to apply an additional class of width 50. This is going to come in later on into play when we do the responsive media queries. So once in here, what I want to do is have a level 3 heading, and this one is going to have the class of beach name. And this one we can just say Sunset Beach Park. Then underneath of here, I'm going to have a span. The span is going to have the class of beach location. Then inside of here, I will have another span with the class of accent text. And then I will have the icon, which is going to be RI, map, pin, line. And that's going to give us the map pin icon. So after this icon, I want to have over here, we actually want to exit out of this because we only want this accent text or the color green on the icon itself. So we are going to go here and then just say the location is going to be Pupukia. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but I guess it doesn't really matter. And then this is going to be Hawaii, USA. And now we have the basic setup here. So underneath of this beach data wrapper inner, we want to have an anchor tag with the class of BTN and then place items, center. And in here, we will have the other icon, which is going to be for the arrow. So class of RI, arrow, right, S, line. And this should have been an I, not a div, just like so. So now we get the arrow icon here. And the last thing that we need here is going to be the image itself. So for that, we have to actually go down another level. And this one is going to be underneath of this beach data. And the image that we want here is going to be inside of the images folder. And the name for it is going to be Beach, Hawaii. Just like so. So now what we have to do is add another div. And this div is going to be for our secondary grid. So I'm going to call it just that. Secondary grid, and then I'm also going to apply the class of dgrid here. Just like so. So what I want to do in here is have 3 other containers for the 3 images that we will have. So I'm going to call this one beach data wrapper. And I'm actually going to add the same image box here and image box left. Then here we are going to have the same thing that we had before with the beach data. So what we can do here is just grab this and we can paste it in here just like so. And then we are going to need the image as well. Well, we need another container here. So let me just actually remove that. And this one is going to be beach data. And then we just paste what we copied in here with the beach data inner. And outside of this beach data, what we want to do is add the image. So let's just grab this one right here. And we find the closing tag for this beach data, still within the wrapper though, and then we place in the image. So what we want to do now, well, first let me just go all the way down so that we can see this, is modify the data in it. So we are going to call this one Tira Beach. And the location for this one is going to be Bora Bora. And this one is in French Polynesia. Then what we are going to be doing is the exact same thing that we did before. Well, we also need the icons, so let's not forget about that. So what I'll do here is grab the anchor tag as well. And as opposed to the image, this one is still going to go within this beach data wrapper. And it's going to be right here. What we are going to do now that we have everything that we need is just copy this. And then we are going to paste it down below. Let me just give myself some more space so that we don't get confused with the other container that we have right here. And then we'll do the same thing here once more. Now we have to modify the classes. So this one is in the middle, so I'll change this to center. Something else that I'm going to be doing here is changing the image. Well, first let's change the first one that we changed over here. So this one will be Beach Bora Bora. Then the one in the center here is going to be, I don't know how to pronounce these names, Beach. This one is in Male, Maldives. And actually, we don't need this right here because I only need that on the larger images. So this looks good right here for the secondary grid. This one, however, we will need it, so we will keep it. And then I'll just go ahead and copy this one again. Well, technically I already did over here since we have the three. All I have to do is just remove this. And then I can just change this left to right. I'm going to change the image here as well. So beach, Maldives. And then finally here we have the last one, which is going to be Grace Bay Beach. And this one is in Turks Caicos. Just like so. So let me see. Well, we have to change the image here as well. And everything should be there now, which it is. So everything looks good so far. So what we are going to do now is go back into the CSS to make this look a lot better because right now it could use some work. So the first thing that I'm going to do here is select this secondary grid that we have right here. And I'm going to apply a gap because I want to create some additional separation between the data that we have right here and then this secondary grid. And I'm going to be using the gap large for this, LG, just like so. And now we get the spacing that we want. Then what I'll do here is select the beach data wrapper. And then I'm going to give this the position of relative. Then I'm going to select the beach data wrapper dot image box and then the image within it. And I'm going to give this the position of absolute. Then the top starting position, 0, left, 0 here as well. And then the width is going to be 100%. So now everything is looking a lot better. We still have a lot more work to do, obviously. Then I'm going to select the beach data. This one is going to have a position of absolute as well. Then it will be positioned towards the bottom at 0, left, 0. C index, just so that it goes on top of the image, is going to be 10, just like so. Then the width here is going to be 100% as well. Display will be flex. And then I want to justify my content space between, just so that we get some separation between the text and the button that we have right here. Something else that I want to do here is select my beach data inner. And this will have a width of 100%. Then the background color is going to be the light background color that we have. And should be this one. And then I'm going to give this some padding all around of 1 rem. Then I'm going to select the beach name. And the font size here is going to be SM. Then what I'll do is give it a margin bottom. And this one is going to be margin SM. Now I'm going to select the beach location. And what I want to do here is add a display. Well, I also want to select, because they're going to share the same styles. So I'm going to also select the beach location dot accent. And what I want to do here is apply a display of flex as well. And then I want to align my items to the center. And then I want to apply a gap of zero point 0.5 rem, just for a bit of the separation there. And then the font size is going to be the extra small. Something else that I noticed here is the issue with the buttons. So let's make sure that it has the class that it needs. So here I can see that it has the class of place items center. Let me just double check here within the reusable classes. And that's happening because of the display flex class here. So it's just stretching. So to fix that, we can just come down here, for example, and we can go ahead and say that the BTN with the class of place items center, it's going to have a display of inline flex as opposed to the display flex. And that's going to fix it because now it doesn't have that particular room to stretch. So it's just going to use as much space as it needs. And since that's going to be the case, it will have no issues placing the icon in the middle. And yeah, this is pretty much it for this particular portion. Next up is going to be the newsletter. So let's go and take care of that real quick. Well, actually, no. Before the newsletter, we actually have to work on the plan trip section. And that's going to be really easy because it's basically just going to be an exact copy of this that we have right here. So yeah, let's go ahead and do that right now. So in here, what we will do is say that obviously we want a section, and let me just be lazy here. And I'm going to copy this portion that we have here. Right till about here. Now let's go all the way back down here. Well, actually, no. What I'll do is copy this. Well, might as well just copy the section as well. I'm going to copy this, paste it in here, and now I'm going to close my section. And, well, the div had to be closed as well. So let me just line this up. Do the same here with the div. And now we can go ahead and just change the names here. So plan trip. And then here for the ID as well. Then we can change this to plan trip container. And then the rest of that is going to stay basically the same. Well, this one is going to be plan trip data. And as far as the order here, we can just get rid of that. And let me see if there's anything else that we need to do here. Well, it doesn't seem like it. So yeah, now that we have that, outside of this plan trip data, what we want to do is add in our image. So this one is going to be beach data wrapper. Again, we just are reusing classes we already have. And then image box. Now in here, we are going to be placing the image, which is inside of the images folder. And then this one is going to be the plan trip image, just like so. So if we scroll all the way down, you'll notice that everything basically is exactly what we needed because it looks exactly as this one. We also have to modify the text, obviously. So for the tagline here, so planning your trip. And this one will say, let's Then for the accent, explore, it says explore there. So explore, and then your dream beach now. So that's looking pretty good. One thing that we need to do is take care of the spacing. So in fact, since we already did that over here, as opposed to doing it all over again, what we can do is just apply this same gap here to this popular destinations. So here I can just say, well, first let me just make sure that I'm adding a class. So plan trip. And well, we don't have spacing here. And the reason for that is because this should be added to the container instead, not the uh the one that's with the secondary grid. So this one should be right up here next to the showcase right here. So this is the one that we want to use. So plan trip container. And now we should be able to see the spacing. I think that I used it. Let me just make sure. So showcased popular destinations as well. So let's go back here and add in the popular destinations. So popular, well, I can just copy this and then say popular. Well, this is just a mess because I should have just like gone with the order. So as opposed to adding it here, let me just add it in between here instead. So popular destinations container. And let me just make sure that I got that right. So popular destinations container. And just to make sure that I didn't misspell something. So this would be the one right here. As you can see, it's taking effect because we get the spacing. And yeah, as I mentioned, that's pretty much it for this because it's exactly the same as this one. So we don't really have to do anything since we are basically reusing all the styles. Now what we have to do is, well, not within the CSS, but back within the HTML, we can work on the newsletter. And this one is going to be a pretty simple section as well. So again, let's start with a section tag, and then we are going to apply the class of newsletter. And the class here of section as well, and the ID of newsletter. Now I'm going to add a div here with the class of newsletter container, and then the class of container here. Then I'm going to have another div. This one is going to be newsletter container inner. And this should be a class. So let's not forget to use the dot in front of it, just like so. And now we can just add in the data that we need. So we are going to use an h1 here, and it's going to have the class of title. And you guys can feel free and pause the video here to copy the text, or you can just use some dummy text. I'm just going to grab it and paste it in here. Then I'm going to add a p tag with the class of description. And this one is just going to have some dummy text as well. I'm going to paste it in here. Then I'm going to have another div, and this div is going to have the class of btn group. And then in here, I'm going to have an anchor tag. It will have the class of btn, and then an additional class of btn lite. This one will say subscribe. Well, first, this is going to be a placeholder for the href, and then subscribe now. Then I'm going to duplicate this down below, and then I'm going to change the text to get a quote. And then we need to get rid of this additional btn lite class. So that's pretty much everything that we need to do here. Next, we are going to hop back inside of the CSS, and underneath of the comment, we'll go ahead and style this and make it look a lot better than it is right now. So let's begin by selecting the newsletter section. And here the background is going to be an image. And then we'll just exit out of the CSS folder, go inside of the images folder, and we are going to find the newsletter image. We will say that the position is going to be to the center, and then no repeat. Then we'll say that the background size will be of cover, just so that it takes up all the available space, and it shrinks and scales with the screen. Then the position here is going to be relative because I'm going to use a pseudo element to create an overlay to make the image darker, just so that the text has better contrast. And then the C index here is going to be 5. Now I'm going to add in this pseudo element, so newsletter after. Then I'm going to set the content to an empty string as usual, because if we don't set a content, then the pseudo element here is not going to show up. Width will be 100%. The height is going to be 100% as well. Position is going to be absolute. Starting top position 0. The left here is going to be 0 as well. And then the background color is going to be an RGBA. And we can just reuse this since it's going to be black. And then the transparency here is going to be 0.4. And then the C index, just so that we can send it behind the text, because right now it's on top of the text, we can just set it to -1, just like so. Now we are going to go underneath and we are going to select the newsletter container. And here we are going to say that this will be a display of flex. And then I'm going to justify my content to the center. Then I'm going to select this newsletter container inner, add it in here. Well, by accident, I hit copy, so it's not on my clipboard anymore. So newsletter container inner. And in here, what we want to do is give this a max width of 78 rem. Then I'm going to text the line to the center, and then the color here is going to be white. So we will use the light variable that we have. Now, as far as the BTN group, the reason why I put it inside of a div was so that I can manipulate how it looks on larger and smaller screens. So I'm going to select that, BTN group. Display will be flex. Then the flex direction here is going to be column. Then I'm going to justify my content to the center. And then I'm going to apply a gap here for separation. So the gap is going to be the gap medium. Just like so. Now, as far as the other color for the BTN light, we are going to be selecting that. So BTN light. The background color here is going to be white. So again, we'll use the light color. And then the color, obviously, since it's white here, it's merging in, so we can't see it. So what we are going to do here is set the color to be black. So for that, we will use the dark color that we have. Well, not necessarily black, but you get what I'm saying. We also have to add in this hover effect, which we are not getting. But that's going to be pretty simple as well. We just have to turn the text back to white here. So BTN light unhover, then we just simply change the color back to white. And if we go ahead and take a look at that, you see that everything works wonderfully. So that's going to be pretty much it for this particular section. Now, the next step is going to be working on the footer. And from there, once we finish, we are going to work on making this responsive by using the media queries. And as well, we are going to be revisiting the JavaScript file because we have to do some more things. So back here inside of the HTML, we are going to go inside of the footer, and the first thing I'm going to do here is add the footer tag with the class of footer as well as section. Then I'm going to have a div with the class of footer container and then the class of container. Then in here, what I'll do is have a footer container inner, again, because I want to have this additional wrapper so that I can manipulate things using CSS grid. Should be footer container inner, not grid. And then the class here of dgrid. So what I want to do now here is have several different groups just so that I can group all of my ULs and all the other content. So I'm going to be using empty divs for this, no class or anything, unless I actually need to manipulate a particular div individually. So in here, I'm going to have an h6, and this h6 is going to have the class of title as well as the class of footer title. Here we can just say company. Well, it doesn't really matter. This is just going to be placeholder text. Uh, Obviously, in a production level, you would have to use the relevant information for the footer list. Then I'm going to have a UL with the class of list. So here we are just reusing what we already used before. And then we'll just like override certain things. Then an li with the class of list item. And then inside an anchor tag with the class of list link. So let me just use a placeholder here. And then we can just use sample link here. You can use any text you want, obviously. And now I can go ahead and just paste this down below a few more times, just like so. And since we already have the basic structure here, we can just go ahead and do the same thing. For example, copy this empty div. Well, not empty div, but this div without a class. And then paste it 2 more times, and now we have 3. The other thing that I'm going to do here is add an address. So for that, we are going to be using a div, but as opposed to being empty, we are going to say that it has the class of contact information. And in here, I'm going to have the same title that I had before. And this one is going to be using the h6 title, footer, title. And the text here again, well, I was going to use company, but since we have contact here, might as well just use the contact name for the title. Then here we are going to be using the address tag, and then I'm going to have a span. This span is going to have the address. So some street. Well, actually, let me just say main street. It doesn't really matter. So next, I'm going to have another span, and this one is going to have the city and state. So in this case, I'm going to use New York, for example, New York City, New York. And then for the zip code, I'm just going to use some random numbers. And missing one. Then for this, I'm going to use the anchor tag. And the anchor tag is actually going to have the telephone number here. So this way, like when, for example, if I hover over it and I click it, then it's going to basically bring it up. And you can dial it if you want. So here I'm going to say 800 and 555 555. And then for the text itself, because obviously if we don't like actually put text in here, it's not going to show up. So I'm just going to copy this, put it in here, and I'm going to change the format, just like so. So what I mean here, for example, if I click it, you see that it tries to open up this so that I can make a call. Then I'm going to basically duplicate this. And here, as opposed to using the telephone, I'm going to be using Mail 2. And this is just so that when you click it, it can open up the whatever mail service you use within your computer. And then I can just use some random email here, email.com. So now if I try to click it, as you can see here, it's going to, well, it's actually showing up on my other monitor. But if you guys can try this by yourself later on, once you get to this point, you'll see what I mean. So it's going to try to open up whatever mail service app that you use. So once that we have the address, I'm going to also have another list, and this one is going to have the social media icons. So underneath of the address, again, I'm going to have UL with the class of list, LI with the class of list item, and then an anchor tag with the class of list link. And then the only difference here is that I'm also going to have an icon inside of the anchor tag. So the icon that we want to use has the class of array, Facebook, and circle line. Just like so. So now that we have the basic structure, we can just go ahead, copy this and paste it down below as many times as needed. And then we can just change the icon that we want to use. So here, Facebook, we can replace it with Instagram. And then we can get rid of the circle right here and just leave the line because we don't need the extra naming there. And then finally, we have Twitter. So here it's going to be the same deal. Just like so. Now we also need to add some copyright information. So what we want to do here is actually exit out of this div that we have up here for the container inner. And that's going to be this one right here. So we are going to go underneath it, and then we are going to add an HR, and then we will add the class of footer separator. And then underneath of this HR, we are going to have a span with the class of copyright. And then as far as the text, we can say ampersand, copy, and that's just going to generate the little copyright icon, 2021, Seaside, we can say Inc. And then all rights reserved. And that's looking pretty good. So the only thing that we need to do now is make this look better and then work on the media queries, and we're going to be pretty much done with this project. So here, let's begin by selecting the footer. The footer is going to have the background color light. And by default, it's going to be transparent, but I'm just going to make sure that I add in this color. So the padding top here is going to be, well, not the padding top, but the padding bottom. I can't type, so padding bottom is going to be 4 rem, just so that I can make it slight smaller. Then as far as the footer container, inner, I'm going to say that this is going to be basically a responsive grid that you don't really need media queries for. Obviously, this doesn't work for every application, but in this case, is going to work perfectly fine. In some other occasions, you might have to use media queries, but like I said, this is simple enough that you don't have to make any changes. So to get this going, we just want to use the repeat function, and then we want to say autofit. Then we want to use the min-max function. And then in here, we want to specify the minimum width. And then here we can specify that we want it to take one fraction of the available space when it can. And as you can see, just like that, it's already responsive. So if I make this bigger, you see that everything is just going to adjust perfectly fine. Even if I make this really, really small. Well, that's just because I made this way too big, because right here, that's just as small as my browser is going to get. So going back here, I'm also going to apply a gap. And the gap is going to be the medium gap. So gap MD, just like so, to create that additional separation between the text here and every single item within it. Now I'm going to select the contact information. And I'm going to select the address inside of it. So here I want to use display flex, then flex direction of column, and then a gap of 1.5 rem. And it should be gap, not grid area. And if we scroll down, you see now that we have the ideal spacing that I want. Then I'm going to select the contact information list. So that's going to be where the icons are. And here I'm going to say that the flex direction is going to be row. Because if you remember correctly, the list currently has the flex direction of column. And I'm also going to add a margin top here for additional separation of 1.5 rem. Then I'm going to basically add a transition here, but it's going to be on the color when we hover over it. We're going to get rid of this for the footer link. So to get rid of that, we can just go ahead and, well, first of all, let me just select the footer link. And here, the transition is going to be color over 0.25 seconds. Now we can go ahead and get rid of the pseudo element and then say that link footer link, well, list link, not just link. So here we can say that this is actually going to be selecting the pseudo element, as I mentioned. And this was the after, I believe. And then we can just say display none. Let's see if that works. And it does. We no longer see the little icon here. So as far as the hover effect itself, that's going to be pretty simple. So footer list link hover. We can say that the color is going to be the accent. So now if we go ahead and hover over it, we get the hover effect here by changing the color to the accent, which is the green. Now I'm going to select the footer title. And in here, what I want to do is just adjust the font size. And this one is going to be the SM. And that's going to be looking a lot better already. Then I'm going to select the, for example, the underline that I had over here for the horizontal line. So the footer separator. And here what I want to do is just create some additional separation. So margin block for the top and bottom spacing. And here I'm going to do 1.2 rem. Then I'm also going to add an opacity of 0.2 just so that it's barely visible, as you can see right there. And then I'll do the same thing for the copyright. And this one is going to have an opacity of 0.8, just to make it a little faded out. I also had an underline here on the original demo under the number and email. So let me just come back here, and to this anchor tag, I can add the class of underline, and then I'll do the same thing for the other one, just like so. Now we can go ahead and select it. I'm actually going to do it up here. Underline. And what we want to do is say that the text decoration is going to be of underline. And that's looking pretty good. So as I mentioned, the final step here now is going to be working on the media queries. And then we also have to sort out some things with JavaScript. But for the time being, let's just go ahead and make some adjustments here with the media query. So the first breakpoint is going to be at 400. So I'll say media screen, and min width here is going to be at 400 pixels. And what I want to adjust here is just the styles for the BTN group. So BTN group. And the flex direction here, I simply just want to change it back to row when we have more space, because as you can see, it's just stretching all across. So flex direction here, row. And as you can see now, we have the buttons exactly how we want them. So let me just go ahead, copy this, paste it down below, and now all we have to do is just change the breakpoint. So this one is going to be 768. We can get rid of the BTN group because we don't need it any longer. Now we can go ahead and select the showcase container. We can also, well, this should be a dot, not a comma. Now we can also select the popular destinations container. And finally, the planned trip container. Now that we have all that, we can go ahead and say that the grid template columns is going to be repeated twice at one fraction each. Using F1FR, 1FR, it works exactly the same, but I just think this looks a lot cleaner. So now if I make this bigger, once it gets to the breakpoint of 768, you can see that my layout is going to be changing here, except for this, but we're going to be fixing that shortly. So that should be right about right there for the breakpoint that we are currently on. So let's continue. Now, if you remember, we applied some ordering classes here as well. So let's go ahead and change that right now. So we are going to say that the order of 1, this one will have an order of 0, because the order, it starts at 0 for the first one, and then if you do, for example, order 1, that's going to be the second one. And I'm going to copy this, paste it down below, change this to 2, and then I can say order 1, and now the orders are going to change. Now I'm going to select the image box, and here I just want to change the min height to 35 rem, 35 rem, just to make this bigger. Then I'm going to select the beach data inner. And what I want to do here is apply a padding. Well, I already had a padding before, but I'm just going to make it slightly larger. Then I'm going to select the secondary grid. And what I want to do here is just sort out the issues that we have right here with this particular grid. So that's going to be pretty simple though. First, again, we have to define some grid template columns. I want to have them side by side, so obviously I'll use the repeat function again. And I'm going to repeat 2 of them, 1 fraction each. But as you can see, that's not working. And the reason, oh, let me actually pull up the inspector here. So if we look at the grid that we have right here, it's not really stretching all across. So we can sort that out by saying that as far as the grid column, we want it to start at 1 and then end here at the basically -1. That's going to stretch, which is 3. So it's going to stretch all across. And now that we have that, let me just get rid of this because we don't really need it, at least not for now. So now that we have that, we can go underneath. And I'm going to select the image box right. And this is going to be this one. What I want to do is stretch it all the way across. So I guess we do need it. Well, technically we don't, but I just want to show you guys what's going on. So I want to take this one and obviously starting at 1, I want to basically stretch it all the way across. So another way we can do that, as opposed to using this, is simply say grid column span 2. And that's going to take up the remaining space. And let me make this smaller again. The next thing that I want to do here is select my image box right and then the beach data inner. So image box right and then the beach data inner. And I want to make the width here 50%. So that's exactly what I'll do. And that's 59. So it should be 50 just like so. So everything is already starting to look pretty good. The next breakpoint is going to be 1,000 pixels. So again, we'll just do the same thing we did before. Copy this, paste it down below, make sure we close that, and then change the breakpoint number. So let me make this even larger. This should be enough. So let's start here by resetting the nav so that now that we have enough space, we can have the nav items here in place. So we are going to select the nav mobile. The background color, we can just set that to transparent. The position, we can set it to initial. Then the width here, initial as well. Then we can set the padding to initial, not auto. Then the C index is going to be initial as well. Transform, initial, because remember this is a reset that we are doing. And then as far as the transition, this is going to be initial as well. And now we can see the navigation here. So what we have to do is style it even further so that it's going to look good on this screen. So I'm going to select the list within the nav and I'm going to change the flex direction to row from column. And as you can see, it's starting to look a lot better already. So I'm going to select the list link after, as well as the list link current after. And what I want to do here, well, first of all, there's a mistake here. I have two when I should be just one selected. So first of all, the first thing that I'll do here is change this here to the top to be initial, because remember we had it on the right when it was a column and the small screens. Now I want it to be here in the middle and under the item. So that's why I'm giving it a top of initial, and then the right here is going to be reset to initial as well. Now I'll set a left of 50%, transform, translate, x, -50%. And that's just going to make sure that it brings it right to the middle. Then, as far as the bottom, I'm going to set it to -1 rem, and that's just going to push it down. What I want to do next is select my SM hidden. And here, remember that before we said to display of none, and we also made it sure that it was important. And then I mentioned how we were going to override it later. So now we can go ahead and display it. We'll set it to block. Obviously, it's not showing up because of the important. So that's why we do it again. And now it's going to show up. Underneath, I'm going to select the LG screen hidden. So now we can go ahead and hide this hamburger menu that we have right here by saying display of none, just like so. Then I'm going to select the nav active, nav mobile. So that's going to be the styles that are applied basically when on smaller screens. So let me just give you guys a demo. So for example, as you can see here, we have like the overlay. And now if I go ahead and make this bigger, you'll see that it kind of stays all messed up. So we are going to make sure that we reset this on larger screens as well, which is what I'm going to be doing now. So I'll say nav when it has the class of active, and then the nav mobile. So here we just have to set the transform to initial. And then the header after the display will be none. So if we try this again, you'll see that it's now gone. Just like so. Well, I messed up here somewhere. Let me see. So header. Oh, it's because I used the before, not the after. So let's try it again. Make it bigger and everything disappears. So it's working just fine. So let's keep working on this. Next, I'm going to select the showcase container. Again, the popular destinations container and the plan trip container. And what I'll do here is just simply increase the gap. So the gap is going to be very large at 10 rem. And then the showcase, and then the image box inside of it. And this one is going to have a min height of 35 rem. Just like so. So that's going to make the images larger. Now I'm going to select my secondary grid, which is this one right here. And I'm going to basically put everything in one row. So what I'll do here is select my secondary grid, grid template columns, and I want to say that it's going to be 2FR. And then here I want to repeat basically 6 times and 1 fraction each. And then here towards the end, 2FR as well. So now we basically have here 6 fractions. We have 7, 8, and then 9 and 10. So basically 9 in total. So let me just open that up here. And as you can see right here. And what I want to do now is basically position things exactly where I want them to go. And to start, I'm going to select the image box left. And I want this one to start at the grid column 1 and then end at 3. Just like so. Then I'm going to select the image box center. And let's show the grid again. And what I want to do here is have this one start here at 3 and then go all the way to 7 over here. So let me just copy this instead, make it a lot faster. So like I mentioned, we are going to start 3 and go all the way to 7. Just like so. And Grid is going to do this automatically, obviously, but I want to make sure that I specify what I want, just in case later on it causes issues. So here, what I want to do is start at 7, grid column. We have to make sure we specify that. Start 7, and then stretch all the way to the end. Just like so. And then I'm going to select my width 50. And I'm going to say that the width here is going to be 50%. Just like so. Now I'm going to select my image box right, and then the beach data inner. Because as you can see, everything right here is just going to be taking 50%. And beach data inner. Since remember that last time we had this one at 50%, since it was the last one, so we just want to make sure that it goes back to being 100%. And well, as I mentioned, we are going to say that this one will be 100% width, just like so. And that's pretty much it for this responsive website. As far as the HTML and the CSS, because as you can see, we are pretty much done. So the last thing that we have to do here is make the links here. For example, when we click on them, we want to make sure that the overlay and the navigation closes. We also want to make sure that they scroll when we click on them. And yeah, we also want to make sure that whenever we click on a link, this marker stays and moves from the previous one. So let's quickly go back inside of the index HTML and let's here just go ahead and say that this one will be showcase. And let me actually make this lowercase. This one will be popular destinations. This one, plan trip. And then the last one is going to be newsletter. Actually, this is for the, let me see here. So plan trip, that's going to be for this one right here. So we can just say newsletter. And then going back inside of the index.html, we want to give this a smooth scrolling experience. So we are going to set the scroll behavior here to smooth. So now, as you can see, everything works great. One thing that I want to do next is go back inside of the index.html, well, not the index.html, but the main.js. So as I mentioned, what we have to do here is basically grab each of the links that we have. And to do that, we have to loop through them and then add an event listener to each one of them. And that event listener is just going to close this navigation when we click any of the links and close the overlay as well. So to do that, first, let's uncomment this one out since I said that we would need it later on. And then we can just go ahead and we can call this one nav links. And the reason why I scroll down is because it has the URL here, the plan trip. But if I just go back to the index.html, it shouldn't do that anymore. And it's also live service on full reload. That's probably why every time it reloads, you see that this goes away. But anyway, what we are going to do here is pass the nav mobile. And then we want to grab the list links that are inside of it. And as I mentioned, what we want to do, well, it should be link, not links. What we want to do now is go down here and we want to use the for each JavaScript method to loop through all of them. We could use a for loop and that kind of thing, but using the for each method is just going to be a lot simpler. So to get started, first we will use the variable that we just declared, and then we want to apply the for each method. So for each, and as you can see, we are already getting a template here. We don't really need this, so we can get rid of it. And element, we can change the name here to something actually more meaningful. So let's just call it link. And in here, what we want to do is apply an event listener to this link. Add event listener. So remember this is basically just a placeholder for each link that we are going to be looping through. The event listener here is going to be of click. We can get rid of this actually. So the event listener is going to be of click. And this is just going to be an arrow function here. And in here, simply what we want to do is basically just this. So what we have here, we simply just put it in here, and now we can just say remove as opposed to toggle. And now if we try to click on the links, it didn't work. Let's see what the issue here is. So console cannot read properties of null, reading for each at 27. So that would be this right here. Let me just make sure that I'm closing everything. So this one already has the closing. This one over here. Let me make sure that I didn't mess up right here. So because it says it's null. So nav mobile. So let me just console dot log. And here I'm just going to pass in the nav links. It's saying no for I messed it up. That's why. So here, as opposed to get element by ID, this should be query selector, because obviously this is not an ID, this is classes. So now you can see that the error is gone. And if I do the same console log now, we should be a collection of all those links. Log nav links. We now get the node list, which is basically just this collection of all the links that we have. So everything should be working now. Let's go back. And if I click destinations, you see that it goes away. Book now, scrolls all the way down, and it goes away. So the other thing that I want to do here, still within this function, because we still need to basically loop through all the items to change the classes whenever we click on it. So what we can do here is say that, let me just go underneath. So first I'm going to define a variable. Here we will use let because we are going to be reassigning it later. And I'm going to call this one current. Then I'm going to get the element here by class name, get document, get element by class name. And the element that I want to grab is this one right here, which is, let me just, right here. So this link with the class of current. So we are going to pass that in, current. Now, what I want to do is grab the current variable, and then we want to find the first item. So basically, when we click on this, the first one is going to obviously be this first link that we have right here because it's the one with the current class. So later on, for example, let's say that if I remove it from here and I put it here, so now the first one at the index of 0 is going to be this one because that's the only one. So with that out of the way, what we can do now is say that the class name for this one right here, which is going to be the first one, obviously it's just going to be the only one since we only have one at a time, is going to equal current at index 0. And then the class name, what we want to do is replace, and this is really important because right here we want to have a space and then say current. So we want to replace current that is at the first index of the same class. Well, I'm probably confusing you guys. So let me try that again. So here we have an element current that we are grabbing. Then we have the only one instance, since why we have this the 0 here, which is the index, the number 1 index, or the first one in the list, but there's only one, so that's why we're using a 0. And here what we want to replace is the class name, which is why we are using the current here once more, class name replace. And then since we have another class here, we want to make sure that we have a space in between them, because if we don't have a space in between it, when we replace it, it's basically just going to look like this. And basically, we don't have a class like that, so it's just going to break the code. So now that's why we have the space. As I mentioned, we want to replace it with an empty string. So when we replace it from there, it's just completely going to be gone. So it's going to be like this. We are only going to have one class here, and then it's going to move over to whatever we click on. So going back, now we grab that placeholder, which, as I mentioned, is just going to be basically a placeholder for each link that we iterate over, and attach that event listener. So here, the class name is going to equals, basically, well, we can just use plus equals here. It's going to be a lot faster as opposed to having to repeat it. And then the space again, current. So now if we go ahead and make this larger so that we can see the, let me see, was it because I removed it from here? Yes, it is. So now we should see it. So now that we have it, if I click here, it should disappear from here and go here. And that's exactly what's happening. So everything is working beautifully. The last step here is going to be the scroll reveal when we add the animations here. So let's go back. And the first thing that we have to do is initialize scroll reveal. But I'm going to actually create a variable, which is what's recommended. So the constant variable, we are going to call it SR for scroll reveal. And then we are going to call the function scroll reveal. And in here, we can pass in some options, and it's going to be an object. And the default properties that I want to pass in here are going to be distance, and distance is basically, it just controls how far the elements move when revealed. So here I want to say 25 pixels, and then the duration. And the duration is basically going to tell the scroll reveal how long the animations are going to take to complete. So here we're going to say 2500. So now whenever we use this variable and we apply the reveal, which is basically going to register with scroll reveal whatever element is target, and then it's going to generate these dials for the animation. So whenever we attach the SR, here it's going to have these default values as well. So the first one here is going to reveal, and then we just use some parentheses here. And again, here we have to select the elements that we want to target. But so that we can select multiple ones, we can just use the backticks. And then I'm going to pass in the image left. I'm going to separate it with a comma. Popular destinations, destination data, actually destinations data. and then one last one of plan trip data. So basically, I'm selecting all three of them because they're all going to have the same um, animation. So in here, what I can do now is separate this with a comma, and then I can come down here and pass in additional properties for the animation that I want. So in this case, I'll use origin, and then I'm going to set it to left. So origin basically just means that it's going to specify what direction the elements are going to come from when revealed. So if I go ahead and refresh that, it's not working. Let me see. You left origin SR. Let me image left. Let me actually just check the console here. So scroll reveal is not defined. SR equals scroll. Oh, yeah. I see the issue right now. So it took me all that long to figure out is because scroll reveal you have to use capital S as well, not just the R. So now what I can go ahead and do, so let me see now there's another issue here. So expression is expected. Oh, origin, obviously, it's going to be left. And now everything's working. So finally we got all that figured out. It's usually like the simplest things that mess you up for a while. So we can go ahead and move down to the next one. So in this case, I want to animate this image in the center here. So again, we'll use SR, reveal. And this one, what I want to do with it is we can use the single quotes here since we're only going to pass in one element. So image center. And then here I want to set the origin to be from the bottom, just like so. Then I'm going to select the image right as well as the showcase data. So SR, I keep putting a dot in front of it. So reveal, and in here, going to be using the backticks again, image right, and then showcase data. Then we just separate that, and we can pass in the properties that we want. And in this case, it's going to be just the origin, and it's going to be to the right, just like so. Then we can move down even further, and now we can go ahead and select the SR once more, reveal, use the backticks, and then beach data wrapper. And technically, I guess we didn't need the backticks here because we're only going to be using one class. And in here, what I want to do is set the origin to the bottom. And I also want to set an interval here. And the interval is just going to be basically the time between each animation reveal. So interval, so that's going to be for this one right here. So obviously nothing is happening. But now when I set the interval to, let's say, 250, when they come into view, well, the animations there already happened. So here, when they come into view, you're going to see that there's an interval between each animation. And we need a couple more things here. So let's go all the way down to the newsletter here. SR reveal. And this one is going to be for the newsletter container. And here, I want the origin to be the top. Just like so. And finally, SR, review, and then we're going to be using the backticks here because we have several things. So we have the footer, container, inner. Then we have the div. So basically each div that we have right here, let me just show you guys really quick. So each div that we have in here to group the lists, that's what we are selecting here, which is like each direct children or child. Then we separate that. And what we want to do is grab the footer separator. And then finally, the copyright. And then the options here that I want to use, it's origin, the bottom. And for some reason, I keep messing that up. And then finally, the interval here is going to be 250 as well. So as you can see, everything is animating in exactly how we want it to be. So now let me just make this larger. As you can see, everything is showing up and looks great. Now, if we keep scrolling just for the sake of showing you guys how the animations are looking, you can see that works. Here, the responsive view also looks pretty good. And then as we keep changing the layout, everything still looks great. So one thing that I wanted to point out is I'm going to be putting a link in the description below to Scroll Reveal because there you can actually see the full documentation on all the things that are possible. Like for example, if you wanted this to loop, there's an option for that. So whenever they go out of view and you go back up, they basically, the animation just resets. But there's like so much more to Scroll Reveal. But here we only had just a little bit of time to cover the things that we did. But I'll leave a link in the description below to their API just so that you can see all the options that you can use. Other than that, that's just going to be it for this particular project. I'll catch you guys in the next one.